Hey guys, welcome back. Logan Albright here, and today I want to talk to you about The Confidence Man by Herman Melville. I have my Library of America edition here of Melville's late works, and this was his final novel, which I finally got around to reading. Just finished it yesterday, and it was completed in 1857, and it's a deeply strange book. Before I go on too far, I kind of want to say spoilers. There's not really anything to spoil, but the novel is so strange and so experimental that I feel like I can't really talk about it without sort of giving the whole thing away. So if you want to go in blind, I totally respect that, and you should do that and turn off the video. But I am going to talk about it because I think it's a really interesting book, and I want to share my thoughts on it. First of all, Herman Melville is one of my favorite authors, one of my favorite novelists, American 19th century novelist famous for Moby-Dick. This book was published just 6 years after Moby-Dick, 1857. Moby-Dick came out in 1851, and his style has changed so dramatically. I talked about this a little bit in my other video on Herman Melville, where I talked about his book Pierre, which is also incredibly strange, and I consider it a masterpiece. But he started out as a travel writer. He traveled around the world. He did whaling cruises. He was in the Navy, and he saw all these islands in the South Pacific, and he wanted to write about them. And so he wrote these kind of travelogue narratives, which don't hold up that well. They're pretty superficial, but they sold really well at the time. And everybody thought he was this great adventure writer. And then he just started getting a lot more philosophical and a lot more weird. And Moby-Dick is sort of the middle ground, where it is a whaling story, it is a adventure story, but it has so much philosophy in it. And there's all these weird tangents where he talks about the profession of whaling and the biology of the whale and all this history and all these literary allusions. It's a really weird novel. But then after Moby-Dick, he got even weirder, and he got much less successful and became pretty bitter, and that he wasn't making any money as a writer because his writing just got too strange. And Pierre is very bizarre. And The Confidence Man is probably even more bizarre. Really weird book. The Confidence Man takes place on board a boat on the Mississippi River. It takes place on April Fool's Day, and it deals with all of these characters that are on the boat interacting with each other. And it's essentially a little series of vignettes. Like, there's almost no plot to speak of. It's all these characters and their interactions and their conversations. There's tons of them. There's dozens of characters. And there's no real through line. They're all just talking to each other. But they're all linked. All these stories are linked by this idea of trust. It's like an extended meditation on trust, or confidence, as the novel calls it. I read that the word confidence appears in every chapter of the book. I think there's 45 chapters. So it's used a lot. And it's all about who can you trust, who can't you trust, what should you trust, what's the role of trust in society. And you have all these kind of flim-flam men, these con men, and they're all trying to get money out of each other. And there's beggars, and there's preachers, and there's herb salesmen, like a quack doctor, and there's people trying to push fraud investments, and there's people trying to get you to loan them money. And it's always kind of unclear to what extent they're telling the truth, to what extent they're trying to pull one over on someone. It's unclear whether these people are different people or the same person. I've read analysis of it where people say that it's one person who's kind of shape-shifting or changing his appearance. I've read other interpretations where it's different people. It's really hard to tell. It's very ambiguous the way it's written. And it's just a lot of conversations and interactions about this idea of trust and confidence. And there's a lot of the characters are continually complaining and bemoaning the fact that people are cynical and they don't trust each other, and wouldn't it be a better world if we could trust our fellow man? And then they try to pull one over on the other person and try to get their money off of them. But like I said, I kept expecting there to be some kind of a plot. I kept expecting there to be some kind of a twist. I thought at the end that maybe it would turn out that they were all the same person all along, but it just goes on, and there's no arc, and it just kind of ends when it's ready to end. And actually the last line in the book kind of indicates that it could continue to go on for as long as you have the patience for it to. And there's a lot of philosophical talk about the nature of man, and about the nature of trust, and about other things, about religion, about all kinds of things, about American colonialism, all kinds of sort of tangential conversations that happen, and meditations. Very, very strange. I never really knew what to make of it. I wanted to sit on this for about a day and not do the video review right away, because I wanted to think about the message of the book, if there is a message. And the conclusion I came to is that it's sort of a mixed message, and it's a little bit nihilistic, and it's a little bit contradictory. Like I said, all the characters in the book are constantly bemoaning the fact that people don't have trust in each other, they don't have confidence in each other, and what a cynical society we become. And I feel like there's some truth in that, and that there's some sincerity in that in Melville's part. He does a lot of asides where he kind of breaks the fourth wall and talks to the audience about literary style or about sort of making fun of his own writing to a certain extent. And I think that there's some sincerity in his worry that society has become too cynical. On the other hand, all the characters in the book give you every reason to be cynical, and they punish trust whenever it's displayed. They punish confidence whenever it's displayed by taking advantage of it. So the message of the book seems to be, wouldn't it be great if we could trust each other, but we can't because people are going to take advantage of you if you do, which is a little bit depressing. But I think that's part of what he's getting at. There's certainly a lot more themes in the book than that, and it's hard to dig them all out and figure out exactly what he's getting at, but I think that's part of it. The style of the novel is extremely intricate and elaborate and dense. The sentences are very long with lots of clauses, lots of literary allusions, lots of big words. It's actually quite difficult to read. It took me a while to get through it. It's not that long of a book, a couple hundred pages, but it took me quite a while to read it because I had to read it slowly to try to understand what the author is saying, because he writes in a very dense style that's kind of typical of the late 19th century, mid-19th century style. But yeah, it's certainly evolved stylistically from his earlier works very rapidly. The kind of elaborateness with which he writes is not on display and works before Moby-Dick, and you kind of start to see it in Moby-Dick, and then it just gets more and more dense as it goes along. And I know that he was disappointed that readers didn't respond to it, but it's not hard to understand why. Not only is the novel pretty much incomprehensible and pretty much unprecedented in how strange it is and how non-traditional it is, but just the writing itself is very hard to read. And you can see it as sort of presaging more experimental 20th century styles. I kept thinking of James Joyce when I was reading this because I feel like James Joyce's very non-traditional experimental style owes a little bit to Melville, really breaking the bounds of what is considered a novel. I wouldn't even really call this a novel because there's no overarching plot and the characters are all kind of fleeting and ephemeral. So yes, this was the last novel that Herman Melville wrote. He also wrote Billy Budd, which is an unfinished sort of novella. That was his last thing that he wrote before he died. I've read that as well. It's very good. But a lot less experimental and a lot less difficult to read than his other works of this time period. I've now read all of his novels, and I think they're great. I really recommend Melville, especially the earlier stuff. Moby-Dick and the couple right before that, Redburn and White Jacket, are very good. And then once you like those and get into those, Pierre is I think, a masterpiece. I haven't really decided whether I like The Confidence Man or not. I didn't really enjoy it that much while I was reading it, I would say, because it was so confusing, and I was trying to figure out what was going on with it the whole time. But it certainly has been thought-provoking, and I'm glad I read it. And I think it's the kind of thing that I'll probably read again at some point, because I feel like I couldn't get everything out of it on the first reading. It's so dense, there's so much going on, and I feel like I missed things. So it was rewarding in the sense that it's something that I'm going to be thinking about for a long time, and I'm going to be digesting for a long time. But it is certainly not an easy read, and I wouldn't really say an enjoyable read, at least not the first time. But it's something I want to return to and revisit in the future, because I think that really great writers like Melville, they give you a lot of meat to chew on. And it's not something you can always just read and put away and be done with. You have to go back to it again and again to really get the most out of it. And I like that, even though it's sometimes a bit of a chore to get through. I really like that it's something that will live with you for a while, and you can take with you, and you can carry it with you throughout your other literary journeys. And it's not just something you're going to read and forget about and throw away and never revisit again, like a lot of kind of modern paperback trade fiction stuff. This is something that it has endured for 150 years, and deservedly so, for being just something really different and really, I think, giving a lot of influence to later styles. And I think it was pretty heavily panned when it first came out. The critics didn't understand it at all and hated it. Didn't make a lot of money. It kind of inspired Melville to retire from full-time writing and go on a lecture circuit instead, because he couldn't really make money writing because his work was so poorly received. But it has endured, and I think it deserves to endure, because I think he was an uncommonly gifted writer. And it's worth going back to his works and reading them again, especially the later stuff that really is different and isn't just the travel narratives of his youth. So I would recommend The Confidence Man to people who are looking for something really different, really experimental, and want something kind of philosophical to dig their teeth into, that they're willing to take their time over and not rush through. I think you'll really get something out of it. But to a more casual reader, maybe someone who hasn't read Melville before, start with an earlier one. I love Moby-Dick. It's one of my favorite novels, but maybe start with White Jacket or Redburn. Those are just great, really enjoyable adventure stories on the high seas. So a lot of fun. Melville's just such an interesting guy to me because his style varies so much over his pretty short career. He really just evolved incredibly rapidly, and it went from these very flowery, or I shouldn't say flowery, very shallow kind of adventure stories to these incredibly deep, densely layered, textured, philosophical works. I also love his short stories. He has this volume called the Piazza Tales, the most famous of which is Bartleby the Scrivener. All those are fantastic. A lot to think about. Great writing, very poetic. Certainly he's up there with my all-time favorite writers. So I'm sad that I don't have any more Melville novels to read, but I still have a little bit at the end of this book. There's some uncollected prose, some uncollected stories that I haven't read, so I still have to get into those. But I've pretty much gone through most of his work at this point, and it's well worth doing so. So that's what I have to say about The Confidence Man. I hope you found something enlightening or enjoyable in it. If you have read it and you have interpretations of it that you'd like to share, feel free to leave those in the comments. And I hope you'll subscribe to the channel so that I can give you more videos like this in the future. I'm trying to read more fiction these days. I had a dry spell where I was only reading nonfiction, and I'm trying to get back into reading more fiction so I can review some more novels for you guys. So hopefully we'll have more of those in the future. Until then, I've been Logan Albright. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope you have a great day. See you later.